It's a beautiful day in the Honesty House. A beautiful day in the Honesty House. Could you be honest? Would you be honest? Ooh. Well, we're here in the studio in the backyard of 423 High Street in Germantown. And we're returning to how many people came back from the dead in the Bible. All right. We're moving on to Luke chapter 8. Luke chapter 8. Do 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 do. Bum 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 bum. Luke chapter 8. Who came back from the dead in the Bible? Luke chapter 8. Now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a ruler of the synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house, because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing in against you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." Power comes from God when there's a person full of faith. Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." While Yeshua was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. "Your daughter is dead," he said. "Don't bother the teacher anymore." Now let's put in here a little note. The leader of the synagogue had been told by the Pharisees, "If you follow this Jesus guy, you will be disbarred from our fellowship. You will lose your position if you hang out with this Jesus guy." So his friends are coming, "Oh, don't bother the teacher anymore. Your daughter's dead." Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just believe and she will be healed." When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James. Jesus had the 3 disciples, 1, 2, 3. The 3, the 12, the 70, and the multitude. Sometimes there's only 3 people that understand you and hang with you. When Jesus arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. All the people that had the most hope in heaven for the girl. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. "Stop wailing," Jesus said. "She's not dead, she's just asleep." I want to remind you that all through the scriptures, death is referred to as sleep. They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead, but he took her by the hand and said, "My child, get up." Her spirit returned. At once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Come on. Her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. That's Luke chapter 8. Now, that same story is reported in Matthew chapter 9. Here it is in the King James Version. Starting verse 23. 23. Come on. Come on, boys, focus. 23. And when Jesus came into the ruler's house, while he spoke these things unto them, behold, there became a certain ruler and worshipped him, saying, My daughter is even now dead, but come and lay thy hand upon her, and she shall live. And Jesus arose and followed him, and so did his disciples. And behold, a woman which was diseased with an issue of blood 12 years came behind him and touched the hem of his garment. For she said within herself, If I may just touch his garment, I shall be whole. But Jesus turned himself about, and when he saw her, he said, Daughter, be of good comfort, thy faith has made thee whole. And the woman was made whole from that hour. And when Jesus came into the ruler's house and saw the minstrels and the people making a noise, Get me a minstrel. He said unto them, Give place, for the maid is not dead, but sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn. But when the people were put forth, he went in and took her by the hand, and the maid arose. And the fame hereof went abroad into all of that land. And when Jesus departed thence, 2 blind men followed him, crying and saying, Thou Son of David, have mercy on us. So there's the little girl being healed again. Mark 5 is the same account. Mark 5. These are the ones that came back from the dead. Mark 5. Same story. Jairus' daughter. Mark 5. This page has never been opened. This old Bible. Mark 5, 23. And behold, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet, and besought him greatly, saying, My little daughter lieth at the point of death. I pray thee, come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live. And Jesus went with him, and much people followed him and thronged him. And a certain woman which had an issue of blood 12 years, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse. When she had heard of Jesus, came in the press behind and touched his garment, for she said, If I might touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned himself about in all the people, and said, Who touched my clothes? And his disciples said to him, You see how many people are pressing on you, and you're asking who touched you? And he looked round about to see her that had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, inside her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. And he said unto her, Daughter, your faith has made you whole. Go in peace, and be whole of your plague. While he yet spoke, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's house certain men who said, Your daughter is dead. Why troublest thou the master any further? As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he saith unto the ruler of the synagogue, Be not afraid, only believe. And he suffered no man to follow him, save Peter and James and John the brother of James. And he cometh to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and seeth the tumult, and them that wept and wailed greatly. And when he was come in, he saith unto them, Why ye make this ado, and weep? The damsel is not dead, but sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn. But when he had put them all out, he taketh the father and the mother of the damsel, and them that were with him, and entered in where the damsel was lying. And he took the damsel by the hand, and saith unto her, Talitha cumi, which is being interpreted, Damsel, little girl, I say to you, arise. Talitha cumi. And straightway the damsel arose and walked, for she was one of the age of 12 years. And they were astonished with a great astonishment. And he charged them straitly that no man should know it, and commanded that something should be given her to eat. And he went out from thence. Those are the three stories of the healing of Jairus' daughter. Now, John, chapter 11, Lazarus. Jesus went back across the Jordan to the place where John had been baptizing in the early days. Here he stayed, and many people came to him. They said, though John never performed a sign, all that John said about this man was true. And in that place, many people believed in Jesus. Now, a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord, wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, This sickness will not end in death. That's the red letters. This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, Let us go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you're going back? Yeshua answered, Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when people walk at night that they stumble, for they have no light. By this, Jesus is saying, he has a light. He is seeing by a light that the world cannot see. He knows when it's safe and he knows when it's dangerous. It's not night and day. It's not when it's obvious. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of the sleep of death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. I love this stuff. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. I am glad I was not there. Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, Let us also go, that we may die with him. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to him, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she told him. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who was to come into this world. This is such a wonderful thing. We hear about Mary and Martha, and I'm telling you, Martha says the coolest thing. She says, we know, I believe, I know and believe that you are Messiah, Son of God, who was to come into the world. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, a stink, for he has been there 4 days. And Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Now I want to tell you something. In the book, Like a Mighty Wind, once they don't have the courage to raise a guy from the dead. The second time they come into a town, there's a guy who's dead and he stinks. And you can smell the dead body from far away. And they go towards the dead body and they're terrified. And God uses them to bring the guy back from the dead, and he tells stories about being dead and coming back to life. This is going on from place to place. It's still happening. There's a bad odor. He's been there for 4 days. Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out! The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did put their faith in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is the ruling authority of the priesthood. What are we accomplishing, they asked. Here's this man performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, spoke up. You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than the whole nation perish. He did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied. He prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, and not only for that nation, but for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. So from that day on, the day of Lazarus coming back from the dead, from that day on, they plotted to take his life. Lazarus comes back to life. Jesus' death is planned. Therefore, Jesus no longer moved about publicly among the Jews. Instead, he withdrew to a region near the wilderness, to a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, many went up from the country to Jerusalem for their ceremonial cleansing before the Passover. They kept looking for Jesus. And as they stood in the temple courts, they asked one another, "What do you think? Isn't he coming to the festival at all?" But the chief priests and the Pharisees had given order that anyone who found out where Jesus was should report it so that they might arrest him. The resurrection of Lazarus and the planning of Jesus' death. John chapter 11. Now, Matthew, we've got quite a few Bibles here opened up to these places. Matthew 27. Matthew 27. Here we go. All right, Matthew 27. Matthew 27. Here's the death of Jesus. The leading priests, the teachers of religious law, and the elders also mocked Jesus on the cross. He saved others, they scoffed, but he can't save himself. So he's the king of Israel, is he? Let him come down from the cross right now, and we will believe in him. He trusted God, so let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, I am the Son of God. Even the revolutionaries who were crucified with him ridiculed him in the same way. At noon, darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. At about 3 o'clock, that's why we stop and we pray at 3. We say, thank you, Jesus, for giving up your ghost, your spirit. Pray at 9 when he was nailed. We pray at noon when the darkness falls across the land. We stop and pray at 3 o'clock, just like Daniel did. All the angels have known that the 3 times of Jesus, nailed, darkness, and given up the spirit and saying, it is finished. Those are the three times in the middle of the day where we stop and we thank our friend. At about 3 o'clock, Yeshua called out with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you abandoned me? Now in Aramaic, I have heard that this means, my God, for this I was spared, because God prevented Jesus from being killed so many times. And in Aramaic, the wise ones are saying, what he's saying is like, You spared me so many times for this, like the worst death that anyone has ever known. My God, for this I was spared over and over again. The implication is that God actually never abandoned him. Some of the bystanders misunderstood and thought he was calling for the prophet Elijah. One of them ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, holding it up to him on a reed stick so he could drink. But the rest said, "Wait, let's see whether Elijah comes to save him." Then Yeshua shouted out again, and he released his spirit. At that moment, the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. That's a curtain that's 5 stories tall, 6 inches thick. The earth shook, rocks split apart, and tombs opened. The bodies of many godly men and women who had died were raised from the dead. They left the cemetery after Jesus' resurrection, went into the holy city of Jerusalem, and appeared to many people. The Roman officer and the other soldiers at the crucifixion were terrified by the earthquake and all that had happened. They said, "This man truly was the Son of God." Now, people coming back from the dead. Many godly men and women who had died were raised from the dead. They left the cemetery after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city of Jerusalem and appeared to many people. One of the things I love to study in the early Christian writings is what happened to the friends of God who resurrected. They showed up in the city after Jesus resurrected. Jesus was appearing to people for 40 days. I want to know the details about that. A bunch of people came back from the dead, just showed up and started saying hi to people. How wild is that? Yahoo! That's pretty crazy. Amazing. Okay. Now, we're going to wrap this one up right here. Okay? So that is many people coming back from the dead and going and saying hi to people when Jesus resurrected. The next things we're going to cover are John 20 and 1 Corinthians 15, 4-8. This is the appearances of Messiah after he came back from the dead. And then we're going to hit the ones from in Acts. So, people that came back from the dead. Part 2. Woohoo! Yippee!